we're not going to go in depth about serverless introduction. Yes, we did start as a function as a service, but over the years it became more the mindset and new agility. And we meshed really well with the product managers and the business owners. And every meetup we would recommend some book for them to read up, because unfortunately in IT most of the changes come top down. But like years later, like we are still there is still big disconnect between IT and the business. And way too often we IT guys behave like car mechanics that enjoy pimping cars in the garage instead of driving business around. So we were thinking how to help companies accelerate beyond giving them these books to read. So we're going to start doing 4 things. The first one we're already doing. These are more business-focused topics like the one today to help businesses accelerate. Then if you need a second opinion on application data architectures, we're going to do that for free. And then number of us are here consultants. We also offer consulting services, regardless how short they are. We have people from different variety of skills, so we can take that off even working from home. And for those who are not full-time people who are not interested in contracts, we'll start matchmaking between the cloud pros in the community and employees. So to start doing that, I will post in the chat the link to the form. Even if you're not interested to changing jobs or offering jobs, the survey that you will do will help you win Manning Publications a book or a video or whatever you like, any product they have. They've been with us over 3 years, and we are really grateful to have them. So do the survey. A link will come in the chat, and then we'll have the raffle at the end. Please don't double submit for today, but it's okay if you already did survey before. I will just take today's date for the wheels of names. If you go to the website, we have more meetups along the lines of being business-focused planned for the months to come. I look forward to seeing you there. Please rate us, and you don't have to be a superstar like Joe to talk to us. Like I'll give example. Last meetup we had was a startup owner who learned hard way how expensive it can be to make mistakes in the cloud, and he shared that experience. It's really popular YouTube video now. So please ask me or John about the topics you want to present, and we'll pencil it in. And then going back to Joe. So this is an old talk you gave Joe in 2016. So you've been true source of inspiration to me, both as a software engineer, as a failed entrepreneur. Like from the business point of view, the most of the startup owners I know, they're struggling to take off one company off the ground, and you are now at your 6th, and it's kind of growing. So we're really happy for you. From the technical point of view, like since I found you, I've been going through architectural diagrams and learning about the services you used. We had Netifly, if you remember, not once, but 3 times over the years to come to visit us. We had Cloudinary talk to us. We had Algolia come from UK to present a Serverless Toronto meetups. And then we had a couple meetups about Firebase as well. So this is just example how we are learning from you. And then in 2019, you had this talk, we connected on LinkedIn, where at the end, after the beautiful presentation about AWS serverless tech you're using, you mentioned how your analytics is in the BigQuery in Google Cloud, and using company Fivetran to move the data between DynamoDB and BigQuery. So we invited also Fivetran to do a quick demo after your presentation today, because this is not the only pipeline they do. We did have a meetup about pipelines using serverless, but there is nothing to code if you use products like Fivetran. It's automating data ingestion. So, Joe, I'm really honored. Thank you for deciding to visit us, and please take it away. So I will stop.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, let me. Sorry, as I remember how to use
bottom right
Google Meet. Yeah, I get it. All right, here we go. All right, so excellent. So I think it's useful to sort of talk through why I believe and where I come from to talk about why Fivetran and data lakes and the way we do things at Branch is the best way to do things. And with a lot of things that I do, I don't have experience doing them all sorts of other different ways. And actually, one of the things that I would love to do that I've never done, and it would be somewhat wasteful, is to actually build the exact same application like 8 different ways, and then just compare all of the different outputs. It would be like a really great experiment. And I have a hypothesis about how that would go, but I haven't done it. But the good news is for this topic of conversation, I've actually spent a lot of time dealing with enterprise data warehouses, data lakes, ETLs, building analytic functions out, and building companies that have analytic functions. And so I have a very high degree of confidence that there is one true way to do this that works at scale over time, that's effective. And I think that most of the industry doesn't do it correctly. And we can talk a little about why. But I think in order for you to understand that, it's useful to get some background, some higher level understanding of how I think and what I've gone through. So I want to start with just a brief background and some things that I've done. So over the last 22 years, I've started 6 companies, and I've sold all of them, and they're all still alive, more or less, in that they have active users. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. And I think it's useful to talk about, and I think it's always good to help understand that I'm not here to, I'm here to give very specific beliefs that I have. But I think it's always helpful to talk about things that you've done wrong or that you've messed up, so that you can understand that, this isn't like the standard self-help book viewpoint of like everything that I touch is gold and I'm a genius in every way in life. I like all of these insights are very hard won, at least from my perspective. So here are 3 companies I started. So the first one, this is at blueprints.com, and it is a play on words, Prince. And it is software for local governments. And I was the technical co-founder of this company. I worked on this more or less full-time for like 4 or 5 years, and then part-time for many more years, another 5 years. And this is software that a local government would use to manage a building permitting process. And we raised a lot of money. And this business is still around. It's still used by more than 100 building departments in the US. It's not a good business. And in building this business, what I learned was that if I, as a participant in an organization, didn't get involved and understand the value the organization brings to the world, the market the organization is in, where the organization is going, right, what the goals of it are, then I was putting I'm putting, 40 to 60 hours a week into something that I didn't know where it was going. I mean, it's sort of like getting in a car and then not knowing where it's going. And then, waking up like 10 years later and it's like not in a nice place, not where I wanted to go, and the ride was bumpy. And so this experience made me really feel like I needed to get into the driver's seat. And I needed to, and that's not necessarily the only solution to this, right? You could not be in the driver's seat, but just understand better. Like, these are all useful questions to know. Like, what are we trying to do? And if we do it, what do we get? And what are the key assumptions underneath, what we're driving to do? But I then founded a company called BuildFacts. I'm going to talk about this a number of times because BuildFacts collected all the building permits in the US, or does still collect all the building permits in the US. So you can see in the ad here, 98% coverage in areas with populations of more than 50,000. And this was a massive ETL job. What BuildFacts does is it goes to all these local governments. There are like 20,000 local governments that have building departments, collects data. It's in CSVs, PDFs, Oracle database backups, SQL Server database backups, CSVs that aren't properly quoted, RTFs. I mean, just like if you name it as a container for data that could be somewhat structured, that is how we would get it. And so we built a process that was, no matter how you get it to us, we will figure out how to process it. And so I founded this company in BuildFacts in 2008, and I tested all of the ETL tools at that time, many of them still around, and continually tested them along the way. And so I had to build, because none of them would work, I had to build and architect our own proprietary way of handling this somewhat interesting problem of, I've got thousands and thousands of different files that are different containers that are set up differently, but have the same core information in them. And then we license that out. Now, what I learned in BuildFacts, other than a lot about the right way to do ETLs, which I'll get back to, but what I really learned was, even if you're in charge, if you're not tackling, if you don't understand the market you're tackling very well, you don't understand how big it is, you're also potentially not going to where you want to go. And I see this a lot. There's a real startup, the startup culture today, like, let's go start a company, let's go build something. And there's a lot of, I think, especially if you're a software developer, there's a sense that, like, I can build things, so, like, let's go build stuff. And the challenge with doing that is that there's a good chance you've picked a market that's a lot smaller than you think it is. And BuildFacts still, to this day, thinks that it can address more market than I think it actually can. And I mean, functionally, BuildFacts sells to insurance companies and hedge funds, and there is a limited number of each that will buy, and there's just a cap on the value. Now it's relatively high. BuildFacts has sold twice, actually. It's worth more and more each time. So it's not like it's a tiny company or a worthless company, but it wasn't. I mean, I wanted to participate in something that was going to be a very large company that had a very large potential. And I deluded myself, I think, at BuildFacts a lot in thinking that it had more potential than what it did. And so then I got somewhat lucky in that I did an incubator in Silicon Valley, and really learned how to do customer development, which is this thing which I now think is invaluable if you want to start and build something, especially as a developer. Instead of saying, let me just start building and build, and then pivot and build, I should just talk to people constantly, and I should really understand who they are and what their pain points are. My favorite book on this topic is a book called Lean Customer Development by a woman named Cindy Alvarez. It's great. It'll give you most of what you want. There's another book in this category that's useful, that's not quite as good as that book, but it covers some other topics, called From Impossible to Inevitable, by I think Jason Lemkin and Aaron Ross. Jason Lemkin of SaaStr, and Aaron Ross of like the first sales VP or growth person at Salesforce. He has a consultancy. And so what was amazing about following this, doing this in an incubator, and launching a product was, as soon as we launched the product, we had spent so much time in interviews that we had like daily usage right away. And we were essentially kind of acquired immediately. Now, again, the thing I learned in that model was you need to own a lot of the company if you want to have control of things, because at that point we were funded by sort of a private equity firm that owned way too much of us. So lots of mistakes made along the way. 22 years of not really having like control of building a great company. And so and it's taken me a long time to understand, what does that mean? Is this opportunity the opportunity that I'm looking for? But thankfully, while I was after I sold Spaceful, after Spaceful was bought, I met my current co-founder in Branch, and he brought to me the idea for Branch, and I said, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. I believe a lot in the Jeff Bezos regret minimization framework, which says, imagine yourself in the future and look back at this decision you're trying to make and ask which one of the paths you're considering is least likely to make you regret the choice. I think it's a great way to think about things. And I knew that if I didn't take this opportunity, I would regret it forever. And it's been phenomenal. It's sort of been and now that's not to say it's not frustrating and not difficult and, all of the things that these can be, but like it's a great idea. We're in a great market. We're executing wonderfully. It's wonderful to work with everyone, and like we have control. We have the control we need. So, in light of this, then, some observations about companies, and this now getting into like the philosophy that I think really matters in this space. And in how you build, how do you think about building a technology organization? How do you think about making choices as you build a technology organization? And this is especially important because there are default best practices that are bad. And the typical way that the enterprise goes and does things. So if you look to larger companies that are being successful at things, oh, can I please zoom in? I have a 4K monitor. I'll share these slides. You're not actually meant to read any of these things. I'm going to talk through them, but like there's not useful information is not on this slide. But I want to talk about the diagram. I want to talk about the challenge of the diagram here. But I think it's really useful to understand to the extent you can have your own philosophy, right, around what decisions you're going to make, right? That will allow you to evaluate choices instead of looking at how someone else does something and saying, oh, we're going to copy that because we perceive them as good, right? And that is how most technology decisions, in terms of how we make decisions in technology organizations, how people build up technology organizations, most of those are made by looking at some other company and just copying what they're doing as best as can be done without ever asking, like, is it even working there? Would it work for me? Like, how does it fit consistently with other things that I'm doing? In my experience, the two sins here are undifferentiated heavy lifting and technology as a blocker, okay? Or basically people being blocked by technology, including the technology department itself. So let's take these in turn. Undifferentiated heavy lifting is when you are doing things, you have insourced and you have to hire and have talent to do something that you could let somebody else handle. And I think one thing that we can all agree fits into that category is electricity. I think there are very few people who would argue that you should run your own like plant that converts like coal or, you know, or whatever into electricity, right? And I think most people also like look to outside internet service providers, right? You're not a POP. But we tend not to say, like, if I look at this diagram on the left, what I see is that the number of people actually building things that clients see is less than half. Less than half of these people in this diagram, right? And this is Pivotal, which is a very expensive, you know, consulting firm. Then this is their recommendation about how to organize your software development organization. And I mean, and I look at it and I say, you know, that's a lot of talent, a lot of positions you have to hire for, a lot of the idea that your recruiting division and your CTO are gonna like actually be able to know whether people are competent at doing these jobs is very low. And so you're probably gonna have this whole total mishmash of different skills are gonna disagree with each other, and a lot of this can be handed off. You know, as you all presumably know, within serverless. I think the other problem, which is less well thought about and understood, is that we seem to have this need in technology to control technology, right? This is like the shadow IT problem, or a variety of different things that it's called. But if you think about, like, we're not going to let any employee on the internet unless they go through a VPN that we control, right? Or we're not going to like, and the only way we can keep people secure and we can make sure everyone's following the rules is if everybody who wants to do anything has to go through us. And this is just murder on how quickly your organization can do things. And it essentially reduces your efficacy to like the least competent tech person out there, because that person is going to show up as the person who has to clear blocks sometimes. This is an org chart right here for a university, and you can find lots of them. This is Case Western, I think. And this is just the IT department. And so what you can see is, if you look at what this org chart is, I'm going to read some of these to you, but you've got finance and administration as an assistant vice president who has several roles: human resources, division finance, IT contracts, and facilities. Human resources. This means that this division has to be used every time they hire anybody at Case Western. Anytime they hire anybody, IT blocks. So the IT has to do stuff. Now that may be necessary, right? I mean, that's a case, you can make a case for it, but you can go through these things and see client application, right? What happens when the client application team is like on vacation or not available? No one can install things on their computer, right? And we have this problem also in the tech department especially with developers. One of the things that I advocate everywhere, when you have a serverless architecture, and one benefit of a serverless architecture is that every developer in every environment can have its own Amazon account or Google project or whatever. And as soon as you do that, nobody can block anybody else. But if you live in a non-serverless world, you guaranteed have developers who break environments, and then the other developers can't do their work. And this is just murder when you think of the cost of a developer per hour. And the fact that you got to bring your operations people and they got to unblock people. So I'm constantly concerned with how do I run people in parallel? And so the two things that I think about philosophically, just as a high level of running technology, from a philosophy standpoint, as I've learned over time, because I've done this the wrong way and I've seen it done the wrong way many times, is whatever staff I have, they need to be what we're good at. Like, why do they exist? They need to exist because our customers should care about them, essentially. And so this is where we only hire front-end developers. I have no DBAs, I have no network engineers, I have no operations people, I've got no DevOps, I've got no internal IT. Literally, we have designers, product managers, and front-end developers. That is it. And then there's some engineering management as well. But those engineering management are also front-end developers who have done front-end development and who are managing. What I have found is that I can teach any front-end developer, no matter how junior, how our back-end works. It's just not that complicated. It's also TypeScript and JavaScript. It's infrastructure as code. You run a command line command the same way you would use to bundle React or deploy React. You just running other commands to deploy the backend. And if you have the right automated tests and you have the right infrastructure as code, it's very simple. The backend is a very simple thing. And so in my experience, if I ask this question, do I need a department to do this, or is there some managed service that can provide it? What I get is faster, cheaper, better, and I can develop my staff. So I have to worry less about, do I need to hire in people with all the skills? I just need to hire in people with like a base level of skills, and I can teach them everything else. And then when I think about this blocking problem, what I want to go to my leadership meetings and have all of the department heads tell me about all the things they're doing with their software as a service and technology that I'm not even aware of, that require nobody on my team to do. I absolutely love hearing about they're building reports in Looker, or they've customized the chat in Zendesk, or they're talking to their 5.9 rep, who handles our sales call center, and they've customized the way outbound calling goes. And I have no idea that any of this is happening. I love it. It means we're going faster than any of our competitors. All of our competitors still have a very command and control centralized piece. And so the question you have to ask is, from an information security standpoint, what do you have to do, right? What are the attack and threat vectors that you're worried about, and how are you preventing them? So that's all very important. But I will tell you, life and death in startup especially, and growth, is about speed of execution. It's not about, could I lock everybody down the most, And so there's a very pragmatic way to approach information security. And we get an SSA 18 audit every year. We get pen tests all the time. We get to do vulnerability scans all the time. We do very well. We're a highly regulated industry. So it's not that there's no information security. It's just you have to be willing to prioritize what you're going to do. And we prioritize speed of execution. One other thing to note is, I guess, and to get out of the way, I need my leaders to be in technology. I don't accept a leader who says, I'm not competent, I can't work with software as a service and a vendor, I need you to put that spoon in my mouth and feed me that food. And I need to be able to sit here, and if it's not working, I need to just be able to cry. And someone needs to help me. That's unacceptable from a leadership standpoint, in my perspective. And that leader would not last in any of my companies. Now, is it perfect? No. Do we have problems? Yes. Do we have leaders who are less comfortable with technology and running technology? Absolutely. But there are so many solutions for this. You're spending so much money with these software as a service vendors. There are systems integrators who are happy to help and take a cut of that. There are so many solutions to these problems. And so I want to highlight that, there is, there's a difference between, like, a good leader can take charge of this, and a bad leader who uses IT as a crutch or uses IT to hide. That's how I think about it. I remember early on in BuildFacts, I used to be very proactive in saying, hey, our phone system went down for like a minute and a half, and this is what happened, and this is what we did to fix it, and this is why it won't happen again. And at the end of the month, it was like, why didn't the salespeople hit their quotas? And they're like, well, the phone system went down and I couldn't use it. And I was like, oh, I get it. Everything I tell you, you're going to use as a weapon against me. You're terrible at sales and you should be gone. But also, you know, I need to not give you easy tools to hide, right? And so, you know, as you do this empowering, you create a culture in which people don't hide and they take responsibility. Okay, so let's talk about some examples here of this philosophy in flight. So this is architecture diagrams. This is a current architecture diagram. If you look at the serverless insurance company talk, you'll see something basically like this. What's important to note is that when I share this diagram, by the way, in due diligence, I've had people come back and say, okay, but like, do you not write any code? Like, do you have any code? Because this just doesn't seem that special or different, you know, like it just looks like you're using some Amazon services, you know, and we're like, okay, yeah. I mean, we can account for the code. We have nearly 500,000 lines of code now. And so we can make you feel good about, like, yes, you're spending money and we're writing lots of code and it's great and it's delightful, but like, you know, go to our website. It's fantastic. Like, that's what you should be looking at. Look at how we've improved our conversion rates over time. You know, things like that. But functionally, we write React, we write Node.js on the back end, you know, increasingly trying to put more and more of it in TypeScript. And then we describe our architecture in terms of managed services. And so again, just keep in mind, we only have front-end developers. We run our code. You know, there isn't anybody who's responsible for like putting in production who's not a developer on it. There isn't anybody who's responsible when it goes down. I mean, it doesn't go down, right? I mean, the way that it goes down is like we write bad code. But you know, with really effective automated testing and good test suites, functionally, we don't have a problem of, you know, terrible code going live. And so it all just works. I mean, we deploy on Friday afternoons, we deploy, you know, multiple times a day. It's not, you know, it's not stressful. It's quite easy to do in this environment. It works very well. It's differentiated, and developers don't block each other, right? Everyone's in their own environment. From our organizational or leadership standpoint, these are like main software as a service we use. Our actual software as a service list is probably like 150 vendors long. But just to talk about some that are outsized, both in both what we pay them and how we think about them as being, you know, in the middle of things. We use Zendesk for support. I think it's the best omni-channel tool for communication because it has talk, it has text, it has chat, and it has email. It's a great ticketing system. The API is very good. It does good integrations with apps. We have a React Native mobile app. It integrates very well with that. It's just generally really stable. It doesn't go down. And again, you can really pummel the API, and it works totally fine. And every other alternative to that I've run into doesn't meet those requirements. Oh, we need to record all our phone calls. And I mean, we need massive audit trails, and it's great. Five9 we use in conjunction with Zendesk. Five9 is what our sales team uses and where our central IVR is. And Five9 has an outbound dialer. And so if you're, you know, I mean, we sell insurance. We have a team of people. They have headsets on all day. And if you go to our website and you get a price and you put in your phone number, we will immediately call you like while you're on the site. And this is just one of the things that happens. I mean, this is one of the ways to increase your conversion rate on insurance. It is absolutely the right thing to do. It's very cost effective. And so, you know, there is Zendesk. You can't do that with Zendesk. Zendesk has something called Zendesk Sell. It's nowhere near as good as Five9 is in terms of this functionality of handling inbound and outbound calling and having queues and routing and answering phone calls really quickly. Again, it records everything. And so, you know, there's data in Five9 and Zendesk that we need, right? So because we have to report on all sorts of things. We use a service called Clarion Door for insurance-related rating and generating forms. U.S. insurance, highly regulated. we will file rates and forms as of a certain date. So like, let's say we have rates and forms that go live on January 1st. You buy a policy on January 2nd, and then we change them on February 1st. Well, that policy you bought on January 2nd, maybe it lasts a year. We have to keep using the rates we filed January 1st for that term of your policy. So there's this constant versioning issue. And regulators want to see audit trails of everything we do. And our rate calculation algorithm is basically like a 100 megabyte Excel file with 250 tabs if you sort of extracted it. And so we have to be able to show that every time we generate a price for state regulators. And so it's very complicated. Clarity Door just does those things for us while letting us control the client experience. And then two services that I highly, highly recommend. I mean, I recommend all of these. Prismic is like a headless CMS. So if you go to ourbranch.com and you look at the content that's on the page, or you look at the blog, or you look at other things, there is this need from a search engine optimization standpoint to run all of your URLs off your main domain. So in other words, if you have like blog.ourbranch.com, that is less good from an SEO perspective as ourbranch.com/blog for Google. You really want to convey all the authority on the domain. But this gets tricky when you're trying to write React apps that sit, but you still want to have a marketing team that can control content and publish content on their own. And so headless CMSs are a great way to do it. We tested all of them essentially, and we found Prismic to be the best. It's not as well known as like Contentful and some of the other ones. I think it's just phenomenal. They have these cool things called slices. They have had easy A/B testing, and we launch partner pages. Our marketing team, our business development team, our sales team, they're kind of in it all the time. And again, this is one of those empowerment things. I don't even know when new blog posts go out. I don't know when we launch new partner pages. It doesn't matter. It handles it perfectly. Integrates really well into React. And then finally, Customer I/O is this phenomenal way to do things in response to events. So we use segment.com as like an event bus for all of our front end and back end events. And then Customer I/O just does things. So sends emails, sends text messages, does in-app chat, does notifications in apps. But it also does, remember when I was saying you go on our website, you put in your phone number, we call you right there. It actually does webhook calls. It posts things in Slack. It is really this kind of like, you can define events and campaigns, and then you can output them everywhere. We have a lot of home security vendors who are our partners, and they want us to call a webhook, like if someone buys and opts into getting like one of their bundles at a discounted rate, and we just use Customer I/O for those webhook calls. It's phenomenal just to feel like I don't have to write that. That's not custom code. I don't have to operate that. I don't have to stand it up. So here are these examples. So now I want to jump into ETLs and data warehouses. And I hope I've given you a background in sort of how I think about things. Great, good thumbs up. A background on how I think about these things and then where all this comes into play. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned at BuildFacts here. But I want to give you 3 diagrams just taken off Google Images of 3 different ETL tools, data pipeline tools. They're called lots of different things. I don't find them to be much different. I've used all 3 of these at least a little bit. So Talend is old. Like Talend was around in 2007, as was Pentaho. Alteryx is a bit newer, public company. It's kind of used a little differently. It's more of a data pipeline tool, but it's not really in concept that different. And Y42 is like a brand new startup. I think it had a TechCrunch article like 2 months ago, and I think it was called No Code Business Intelligence, right? But it's the same thing. I mean, I don't see any real conceptual difference around the central ideas that exist in these 3 products, even though they might be targeting different departments and different buyers, but they all have this same notion, which is wrong. Okay, I just want to be clear, like it is wrong. And the notion that is wrong is what we want to do is we've got data over here, and we're going to get it over here into a particular format. And we're going to do that because we need it to be in that format in order for us to do what we need to do with it. Okay. And that is when you start putting those constraints, that constraint on your system, you immediately make it so that it won't scale and it won't work over time. It will break. That assumption that I need to be able to predefine how this data lands wherever I need to fundamentally turns your system into a brittle thing that will need people constantly putting the wheels back on the car. I mean, it is the worst precondition you can put on it. And there's an origin for this. The origin for this is the data warehouse. And at that point in time, so we go back 20 years, at the point in time, or 15 years, but in that range, right? 17 years maybe, at that time, it was necessary to get the data into a particular format. Yeah, I am talking about the T in the ETL. So that but I want to be like, yes, like this is what I'm talking about. You shouldn't, like, the transform is the bad condition. But I mean, really useful to understand the history and really useful to understand why there is this like latent feeling in the industry that this is something we should do. Because if you go back before 2007, 2008, we did not have columnar databases. They didn't exist. HP Vertica is the first columnar database, and the tool of a columnar database is a total game changer in all of this. But before columnar databases, you could not execute the queries fast enough unless you very precisely modeled the data. And so in an enterprise data warehouse, you had the snowflake schema, you had the star schema, and you had to like define all the questions you want to know the answers to first, and then you'd like figure out how to populate the data into the data warehouse, and that's what you did. And there wasn't another alternative because the query speed was unacceptably slow, like months or years, to get the insights you wanted with just like throw a bunch of data in a database, start running SQL. You couldn't do it. But when Vertica comes out, and in general, people realize there are ways that we can store data such that we can write these previously like incredibly inefficient queries. Suddenly we can get them done in like a reasonable amount of time. And that then unlocked this ability to say, well, maybe we don't have to worry so much about how the data gets to its destination. So if I go back to 2008, when I was evaluating talent and Pentaho and pre-Alteryx, pre-Y40, way pre-Y42, I evaluated these tools and we tried them. And they just kept breaking because the problem is the way you get the data on day one is not the way the data looks day two. You know what happens? There are vertical tabs in the data, right? Or there's all this sort of crazy characters you weren't expecting. One of my favorite tests, though, to do, go to any sufficiently old SQL Server database or Oracle database or even MySQL or even Postgres. It's been going for a couple years. And all I want you to do is use the native tools to export it to a CSV and then try to import that CSV again with the native tools. And what you will find is you cannot. You will be able to export it to a CSV, but then the import tool will choke on something. Again, vertical tabs, null characters, whatever. And you can't do it. It's not possible. And I know this because I used to get all these building department databases in like an Oracle backup. And what we would do is we would like load them into Oracle and we would export them to CSV with the Oracle tools. And then we'd try to import them into like MySQL and it would choke. And it would be, and then we were like, could we import them into Oracle again? No, we couldn't. We had to build our own export tools for every major database because all of their tools assumed like just much cleaner data than was actually stored, right? And you're like, how did you get vertical tabs into this like varchar 20? I don't know. But they're there, you know? And this is one of the things I think, you know, working with junior developers especially is like, I often have these conversations where I'm like, well, it's possible to get a vertical tab in there, so it will be in there eventually. And they're like, how would it get in there? I'm like, no, this isn't, like, you need to understand, like, if it's possible to get in there, you need to assume it's there, because otherwise you've written something brittle. And this is just, I mean, we process so much data in BuildFacts from so many different sources. This is just what happens. And so the problem with this idea, the transform idea, the idea that you're going to take a source and you're going to come up with this nice flow diagrams, which these have, right? And you're going to nicely get it into its piece. It is going to break, and it's going to break because the input's going to be unexpected characters that are just not expected in there, and the input's going to change. The underlying source, you're going to add things to, you're going to change things, and this is just constant, right? I mean, certainly when we would get files from building departments, like from one month to another, who knows? Like, it could change dramatically, and it wouldn't change. Actually, it usually wouldn't change dramatically, but like add a column or rename a column or whatever it was, and suddenly, you know, this tooling requires that you anticipate all of that when you're defining your transforms. So the solution to this, which is what we did at BuildFacts, is, and this is just a diagram stolen from Fivetran, so you may see this again shortly here. But, you know, functionally, I got to let a dog out. I'm going to keep talking. Functionally, you know, what you're doing here is you want a tooling in a system that will get the data to a location. And I need you to understand that that in and of itself is brutally difficult to do. That's the thing. And the problem is, if you come to this from the perspective of, oh, I can export a CSV from a database and I can import the CSV in a database, this isn't hard. Like, you know, I don't know what I could do to like convince you of it, other than to tell you, like, I spent more than a decade doing this, and I can tell you that the idea that you even could have a data source and a destination and have that data flow constantly over time at scale and it would work, that is a brutally difficult problem to solve such that it will just work and work forever. And I think, you know, the best way you could do to convince yourself is probably just to keep messing with it, and try to see if you can break it, and you'll find that you can break it. But what Fivetran is doing, and the philosophy behind Fivetran, which I tested out a lot of vendors with Branch, and I was like, oh my goodness, somebody did it, right? Which is that the goal is just get the data in the destination. You can use SQL to transform it, okay? And now let me underline what I just said. It is still incredibly common for basically any data science consultant to want to use data pipeline tools. We, in fact, have like a systems integrator that we pay for our Google Cloud through, and then they consult for us, because Google Cloud knows that their support is terrible. And so they know that if we hook up with this company and they just get some commission as like the systems integrator or salespeople, then they'll help us with the things we want. And we like them, and they're great, and they've been very helpful. But literally every time we get into a call with them and we explain to them, well, we use Fivetran to get the data into BigQuery, and then we set up a bunch of views, and then we use scheduled queries or a couple other things to kind of, for the longer running queries, which are like 20 minutes long, let's say. So every hour or every day, we're like running that query and like materializing a table, and then we look at it in Looker. And every time these experts come in, they go, oh, have you thought about, you know, Google Data Flow, you know, and doing some data prep, and like, you got this data in here. It's like, no, like, I know you like that tool. I know that seems like a great idea, but I am using what I have, works incredibly well. It's incredibly cheap, and I only need my people to know SQL. So we just need to hire people, and the Google standard SQL is really easy. All you need to know is SQL, and then the data is just there, and you just deal with it however it is. You learn how to deal with it however it is. You make those views that make it, that's your transform, right? Your transformer in these views, and the way you kind of materialize them if they're slow, and then boom, everything's there exactly as you would want it in other ways. But it doesn't have the cool pipeline, right? And you can't write Python to like transform it. All of that's a red herring. It all leads to worse outcomes. Just a note on data lake, right? So the enterprise data warehouse was this view that said, what you need is a very highly curated set of data so you can execute these queries, because otherwise no one's ever going to find anything out, because the queries are going to take too long. In the data lake, the concept is we take it as it comes. So to me, a huge part of the data lake is also embracing this sort of ELT. And if you read descriptions of data lakes, they talk about it. Just pull the data in its native format. That's going to be the most successful, reliable, consistent, speedy way to bring data in. But yet, you will read lots of articles and hear lots of people talk about data lakes in terms of, well, go run data prep or data flow to like prepare things into the data lake. It's crazy to me. You should just you just want a copy of the data into the data lake, then deal with it as it stands. And so let me give you a couple quick examples of what this looks like at Branch. And I'm happy to show other ones if they make sense. I have to like censor some numbers and things, but I'm happy to pull those up if those make sense in response to any questions. So let's just talk about Five. So really, I mean, an architecture diagram is not very useful because there's Fivetran, it sucks all the data in. BigQuery is where it all sits, where we make views, and Looker is where people go and analyze it. Like that's it. It's just, I mean, it's like 3 boxes. It's not that interesting. We do actually also use a company called Immuta, IMMUTA, which is more powerful than Looker is at being able to mask data. So we can say like, this person is not allowed to, like, these people are not allowed to see like birth dates, and these people are not allowed to see names. And then we can say like, nobody's seeing both names and birth dates, for example, things like that. We also have requirements of, you know, this team of people can't have access to see this type of data. And so you can automatically hash it and it logs all the access. So you can always go run an audit trail and say who's looked at what record at what time. So it's also a great piece of software. Not necessary, but useful from a compliance and masking perspective. And you get a sense that we do care about information security, right? Like we're optimizing for speed, but we're always making sure we're meeting those requirements. So at Fivetran, you set up connectors. We've got 69 connectors, and you know, you can see a bunch of them here. We use a lot of Google Sheets. It's pretty useful. You can just have people go pop a bunch of data in. We do a lot of SFTP. So we get claims data in here. We've got Dynamo. This brings over a ton of Dynamo tables. We have to go pull in data from Algolia. Unfortunately, Fivetran does not have an Algolia connector, but you can write your own functional connectors. And so we have one that goes and pulls data from Algolia. We have one that pulls from a service called ChargeDesk. That's pretty useful if you want Stripe functionality, but also need to do some invoices occasionally. We pull it from Google Analytics. We pull it from Zendesk. We pull it from Stripe. We use webhooks. This is really cool, but like, this is the right way to do it. Like, we set up these webhooks and people hit a webhook and then the data just goes into BigQuery. That's all we want. And so this webhook is, we have something on our website, and that we text you to make an appointment to talk with our salespeople, called Appointlet. It's a good service. And so people fill out this Appointlet form, and then as soon as they do, it hits this webhook. And this drops that into BigQuery, and then every 10 minutes we pull BigQuery and we send it back to Five9 to tell Five9 to schedule these phone calls. So literally, with no programming at all, we have built this setup where you can go in and sign up for a call, and our automated dialer will just call you at that time, and you'll just be connected to someone, and it'll screen pop up. I'm saying, hey, we're calling a pre-scheduled call with this person, and here's their name and here's their information. Here's what the configuration looks like. And this is like, let's just be clear. The alternative to this in a Talon and Pentaho is some notion that you're going to define a data pipeline, or Google Data Prep or whatever, or even Glue, right? AWS has, I wrote an article that you can look at, which is all of the different ways to try to get data from DynamoDB just into Athena for querying. And Amazon has an article in which they give you 3 ways to do it. Why do they give you 3 ways to do it? Well, they're all terrible. And so I guess they're figuring like, maybe what we can't meet in quality, we will make up in quantity. But all of them are like, have massive configuration. What's great about Fivetran is like, this is all I get to do. I can set which tables it synchronizes. I can say how often it synchronizes. I can ask to get notifications. I can resync all historical data, and I can get rid of the connection. I can't do anything else. And I think there are a lot of buyers that look at that and go, well, this is unacceptable because I need to like put things in a nice little box and arrange them. And again, it's hard enough to just get this thing to always copy the data because the underlying schema changes, things change. And so I know from having built this at BuildFacts that if Fivetran, I know why Fivetran does this, because this is really hard. And if I have to be able to configure lots of things about it, then Fivetran can't make key assumptions that will allow it to handle changes, that will allow it to resync everything historically. Like they need as a precondition that I'm not changing things, that I can't mess with things. And I know I built this thing. At BuildFacts, we built ELT. We would take that data, we would throw it into MySQL, and only when it was there would we do any manipulation with it. The whole name of the game was just get it into MySQL. I don't care what it looks like. And that's how that worked. So this is Fivetran, BigQuery. I can zoom. I'll share this slide. I mean, I don't like what I'm trying to convey to you with this slide is we got a lot of tables, we got a lot of views, and the SQL can be ugly. Okay. What's in here? If I don't have a great way to zoom on this, at least. Well, let's see. Can I do this? Nope. But there's a lot of JSON extract scalar, which is so BigQuery has some JSON functions. You need to do cross-lateral joins. You're going to have to learn some BigQuery because we have these complicated data structures in DynamoDB, and they're getting put in as this big JSON blob that you got to pull data out of. So yeah, I mean it's and so you could look at this and you could say, well, this is unacceptable. We should transform it on its way there. And in fact, when we talk to consultants about it, they sort of say like, well, why don't you just data prep flow it out of BigQuery and back into BigQuery? And again, it's like it could change. Again, all this underlying stuff can change. And that's a skill that no one has. Everybody knows SQL. We can teach them how to use JSON extract scalar. And we can. Every single person on our report team, of which we have like 5 now, joined us without knowing SQL. And within 2 weeks was basically up to speed writing reports at speed with everyone else. It is not difficult. Okay. At least, in our experience, I don't think we've hired great people and they're wonderful, but I don't think we've hired like the only 5 people in the world who could get up to speed that quickly. And then finally, like here's an example of so every day this goes to, I think, everyone in the company, and this is just part of a dashboard. But so what we get, and there's more with this, but I would have had to censor that one even more. But this is telling us, so these are our live states, and you can see our growth, although it's very flattened. It would look better if they were, sort of squeezed this way. And then you can always see in the sort of May is low over here because obviously May is partial. But we've got, the flow of where we're selling in what state. We care about our probable lifetime expectancy. So like we've got, these are particular sources that we get policies from. And so these are telling us like this one, this is all great. From a 10 and higher, PLE is fantastic. PLE per month is showing, like of the policies that are still enforced from, August, it's a bit better on average than what we're seeing in May. But like this is all, pretty consistent here. And then, what our average premium is for different account policy mixes. We are the only insurance startup actually ever. We're the only insurance company ever in the US to start selling bundled home and auto. Everyone sold one for a long time, then the other. And we're the only company in the US that will sell you bundled home and auto without an agent commission. We're the only direct seller of home and auto in the US. There is not another direct home and auto seller in the US. There are like direct auto like Progressive and Geico, but then if you buy homeowners from them, you'll buy it through their agency and they're selling someone else's policy. And so you pay a commission that goes to them. So we're the only game in town that gives you like basically a 30-point break. And so a home and auto bundle, we are almost always the cheapest, other things being equal. And so that's our policy mix. Our top set of accounts is home and auto policies. We sell umbrella, we sell home auto renters and umbrella bundles, not too many of them. That's the least number, but auto renters bundles. So we bundle a lot. And so this is really important for us. And so we care about looking at these and understanding these. And so we get these via email, we get them in Slack, and we use Looker to actually do all of our reporting out to all of our partners, to everyone else. And also useful to note that we funnel all this data directly into NetSuite. And so and out of BigQuery, but Looker is just looking at the BigQuery views. And so we have this sort of constant data flow that's just running into NetSuite. So we have like all of the Stripe data and everything. We do not have a finance team that's like hand entering data into Excel and then like our hand typing data into NetSuite. There is like actual just data flow from all of this that goes into there. And it's just absolutely delightful and amazing. I've never had a finance team like the one we have that's like very highly focused on like, we should just automate the data flow in. And so anyway, so this is what I want to talk to you about, all of the philosophy and all of how we do things. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think we're going to look a little bit deeper into Fivetran. Hopefully I didn't do the Fivetran presentation as well here.
This is amazing. Thank you so much. Guys, you see what I was telling you about. Thank you so much. Brandon, you want to do your part quickly because Fivetran does more than what you described. So, but you did quite deep overview. So, Brandon, maybe you can make it shorter. Just
sounds good. Yeah. So, Joe, definitely, if you ever want to come work in sales at Fivetran, it'll be a massive waste of your talents, but the door is always open because you covered a lot of these same points that I was actually going to cover around what happened with Fivetran, what it actually serves to do, and kind of what how Fivetran came about. So originally I was going to focus a little bit on how analytics is changing, and really all of this was talking about the high resource waste on pipelines. But I'll start a little bit backwards and actually drop a little bit about how Fivetran got started outside of the analytics landscape changing, a story that you potentially won't hear anywhere else around George and Taylor, our co-founders' thoughts how Fivetran compare with the analytics shifting landscape. So like Joe mentioned, Fivetran got its start when the data warehouse scene started blowing up, especially cloud data warehouses, especially things like Redshift, which was Fivetran's first supported destination, and only continued to escalate as newer technologies came out like Snowflake, like BigQuery, as more people recognized the benefits of moving to these cloud warehouses where storage is like incredibly cheap. No longer do you need to be constrained by not only storage costs, but also the compute runtime of running those analytics like Joe was mentioning. In the past, where a lot of that was sitting on a single server on premise. As we started to look at, okay, there are all these different companies getting data in. The first thing that George and Taylor actually started to build out was a spreadsheet ingester. So the first thing they said was exactly the same thing Joe was saying. It's almost impossible to take a CSV out of one database and put it into another database without running into any sort of issues. And when they found this out, they started building out the spreadsheet ingester that actually George was ideally thinking about when he was doing his PhD in something related to neuroscience or neurobiology. And he was ingesting and analyzing a lot of data at that time. They took that idea, and from that idea, they went to shop it around a few different companies, a few different businesses. And they found that a lot of these companies not only needed this spreadsheet ingester, but more importantly, needed a way to get all their data in from disparate cloud sources. Things like Salesforce, things like Zendesk, tools that so many different companies were utilizing that had such large market share, but all these companies were still doing these custom pipelines for, right? Like that sort of challenge exists at a lot of companies, either doing a custom pipeline through hand coding it themselves or using one of these older tools like an Informatica or like a Talent. And actually that Informatica section was actually Informatica was the first tool that I was aware of within the data integration space. And the reason I became aware of it was because one of my friends worked at Informatica as a consultant at the time. And all I knew was that his projects ran months. I knew that it took a long time. I knew that a lot of it wasn't necessarily just related to let's say onboarding the tool itself, but also things like standing up servers, implementing the software, figure out best practices, figure out who was going to onboard the tool and who was going to manage it through that 6 months to perhaps anywhere from 6 months to 1.5 year engagements while he was working on those projects. And it's those tools like Informatica and the traditional method of ETL where you have to hand code everything, fix your pipelines, combining all of that with the fact that technical resources are always scarce, that companies tend to have a pipeline resource issue. not only do they have a lot of different sources to bring in, but this results in their analysts needing to perform data integration tasks, which ultimately takes away from their time spent actually analyzing data or utilizing it otherwise. And then when it comes to these pipelines, the way that Fivetran thinks about these, how to build the pipelines, how to maintain it, is first and foremost centralizing data, being able to support a variety of sources. Like Joe had mentioned some DynamoDB, he had mentioned some extensibility with the webhooks, with the Google Sheet connectors that we have, even down to CSV functionality via file storage systems like FTP or like S3. So it should be not only able to be compatible with those sources for extract, but also deliver it into the destination in a way that's compatible with that destination. And the thing that I think about the most often in this case is data type mapping. And in the past, that would be a challenging exercise that you would have to do from, let's say, database to cloud data warehouse to understand whether the data types you're actually mapping over can actually be compatible with the queries that your analysts are running, which is just hours of validation. That's something that the tool of Fivetran itself was created to bypass. And the data reliability piece, making sure that in the case of an event outage, in the case of, let's say, the database server being inaccessible for a handful of hours at a time or a handful of minutes, whatever the case may be, the idea is that we restart from that last successful save state so that the level of data integrity that you need for your analytics is maintained, and that we're never accidentally duplicating data or anything along those lines. And finally, that fully managed aspect is something that it's all of you probably understand, seeing as the theme here is serverless, but it's a fully managed service, everything from the infrastructure, never needing to implement any software, never needing to do any patches as a result, and just making sure, or just having a tool that updates itself in the back end. And that's things not only for like the schema change, schema drift capabilities that are naturally built into Fivetran, but also things like API version upgrades for different sources that naturally continue to improve, continue to make more things accessible through the API. You want a pipeline that's able to handle those changes and pull in the latest data from those endpoints so that you can continue to use those for analytics. And Fivetran serves in all these things with our automated connectors, being able to connect to over 150 different sources, displaying them in a format that either mimics the sort of table format of the source that we're pulling from, or we drop it into an entity relationship diagram where all of those diagrams are shared through our public documentation so that analysts can immediately understand how to navigate the data that's landed in the destination warehouse. And our pipelines are built to be drawing from concepts like idempotency to make sure that we are continuously saving after every successful write into the warehouse. So we do know in the case of a source outage, let's say, that we can start from that last successful save spot. And of course, we're cloud native, which for you all means that you'll never have to actually implement anything with Fivetran as far as installation on a server goes, and that you can actually start up a free trial and freely use all of Fivetran to integrate whatever sources you want into whatever compatible destination you're looking for. And this is something that I did before, actually as part of my Fivetran entrance prep, of just trying to figure out, for me, myself, I was trying to figure out, hey, what are some of these newer tools out there? How can I use Snowflake? How can I use BigQuery? And my sample experience was actually ingesting, I think it was NBA player data to try to build my own prediction model for the upcoming NBA fantasy draft that I was, working on at the time. And there are a few things that make Fivetran different, a few things that make us unique in this space. The automatic data updates, those are table stakes. Every data integration tool should continuously maintain that update from your data source to your destination one-to-one. But you'd be surprised at how many tools miss a few things because of things like system columns they perhaps didn't consider that would indicate that the value of a row has changed, or perhaps like something else built into the system. And that's part of what makes it so reliable, is doing a few of those pre-assumptions when creating a data integration pipeline. But another thing that Fivetran does is automatically handle things like schema drift, like Joe was mentioning, that are historically responsible for a lot of pipeline failures, a lot of pipeline breakages. And that's built into our process as well, using things like transaction logs or other system columns if it's a cloud application to understand how a schema has changed and apply those changes in the destination. I've covered the idempotency piece as well, just that ability to recover from failure. But this micro batch architecture is also something that traditionally you would have needed to consider. What is the strain on the source systems? What happens when you're actually extracting the data? What kind of server are you using for runtime to then take that extract and format it into a way that makes sense in destination? And how does that pipeline change over time to accommodate things like new fields or new endpoints that you're perhaps pulling from some API? And we have extensibility in the form of cloud functions for any sources we don't natively have built out, where Fivetran will still do the work of translating the extracts and then landing that into a destination based on the inferred data types. And we also have other extensibility options like S3, like FTP, SFTP, webhooks, Snowplow, to ingest a variety of events and files that you may be receiving from your application or other vendors. And essentially what I'll be covering in the UI demo is what it looks like to handle step one, which is all that you'll need to handle within the Fivetran UI of authenticating your Surface account or your personal user account for whichever data source you're looking to integrate through Fivetran. And then from there, Fivetran handles steps 2 through 6 of doing things like scheduling the extract queries or scheduling the extract API calls, and paging those calls to make sure that we're iterating through the latest rounds of data, and then normalizing that data so that, and as well as structuring and creating the schema inside of your warehouse to continue to update as your data source continues to change as well. And essentially what we're doing is we're abstracting away a lot of the complexity typically required with ETL through connecting to all these different sources. It's not immediately important that you understand all the aspects of this. It's just that if you were to build ETL yourself, you can use this as kind of a map of, hey, how am I going to do things like even things like schedule jobs, where in our UI that looks like a sync slider for just a standard cron job, but this would be something you would have to consider. You'd also have to consider how can I do things like trigger my downstream models inside the warehouse if I were doing a post-load transformation, as well as where to stage the data, let's say, prior to loading, prior to copying the warehouse, and then how to do things like purge that stage data if you don't no longer wish to keep a record of that. From a more practical view of, practical and high level at the same time, of how Fivetran works, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about data updates. A new row in the source, a new value gets inserted in destination. Of course, updated values as well. We're also making sure that those get updated in destination as well, and deletes get recorded as soft deletes. All of this with the idea of making sure that your data is as up to date as possible to make sure that you're making decisions off of a reliable data set, as well as an accurate picture of how your business is at the time. And then with the schema drift handling, little bit self-explanatory of how it works as far as added columns and added tables get added in the destination, as well as removed columns no longer get written to, and same with removed objects, and change data types are handled as well. And these are some of the more common schema drift things that we found that our pipeline is built to handle automatically, again, without needing any sort of manual interference, without any sort of business downtime typically associated with manual interference that then leads to things like not being able to report on your weekly earnings, let's say. Small sample of what it looks like of our pre-built connectors. This is in no way all 150 or 160 or so of the connectors that we're at, but includes a few of the key connectors highlighted by, categorized by the different departments that they might support as far as analytics goes. And then a small highlight of a snippet of customers that we do have. Probably worth calling out here that we do have a case study with Branch, actually, that highlights how you all were working with us, and highlighted that as well. And while I was looking for that Branch case study, which I'll pass over to Daniel later, following to be sent along with this case study deck, or sorry, this deck, I can also include what I found for AWS as well, again, with Branch. And then you all can read a little bit more into Branch's story, though you have had the real experience here, which is far better than the case studies. And with all that, let me jump into the Fivetran UI, which we saw briefly within the slides, the preceding slides to this. But what I can say here is that left-hand side, you can handle things like, the most important thing is probably connectors to get started with, at least for data integrations. And this is where you can set up integrations to various sources that you might have. So over here, you can see highlighted a few of the popular ones, like Salesforce, like disparate databases, like Shopify, like SQL Server, like HubSpot. Just for demonstration's sake, what I'll walk over is actually, what should I walk over? I can walk over Google Ads, let's say. And then in Google Ads, the way to set up a connector is pretty typical of what you would see for other connectors as well, as far as this OAuth method. So for all of our cloud sources, what would happen is just standard OAuth. You would click the authorize button inside the Fivetran UI. You would click the account that you want to authorize with, and then you would click the allow button to allow Fivetran to access this data source on your behalf so that we can pull information. You'll need a few other authorization criteria depending on what source you're looking at. Though it's worth mentioning, we do have setup guides on the right-hand side. So if I were net new to this, if I were unfamiliar with the data source but had a service account, this is how I do things like find a customer ID for Google Ads. And then from here, let's go into what it looks like for one of the live connections I have running, which is this NetSuite one. For a few of our connectors, you can, well, for every single one of our connectors, the layout's the same as far as status, logs, schema, setup goes. Keep in mind that the only reason I showed only setup to begin with is because that's the bulk of the work within Fivetran, is prepping that data source that you want integrated for access, for Fivetran to access. And then from there, you can do some ongoing things that Joe highlighted, like let's say you want to increase the sync frequency, you can do so with the sliding bar. And then that'll automatically update the schedule so that Fivetran continues to update the data at your desired sync frequency. Abstracting away a lot of the typical things associated with ELT, like schema creation and schema maintenance going forward. And in the case of this NetSuite connector that I'm highlighting, again, you can see what's actually happening with the logs tab that we have within Fivetran of just like, hey, what is Fivetran doing as far as checking data? What are the types of endpoints that we're hitting for this various source? For databases, what types of queries are running? And this is really the bulk, how you can see the bulk of the work that Fivetran is doing. But what you'll actually see in your day-to-day work process, if you're an analyst, let's say, is probably just the data inside of your warehouse. So in the warehouse of that we're looking at right now, I'm using a sample Snowflake instance, but this could easily be a BigQuery data set. It could be a Redshift database. These are the tables that I've selected from Fivetran to be brought over from our NetSuite instance. And this is a preview of what it looks like. Not entirely important. This is all like dummy data from our NetSuite sandbox account. But an example of what an items table would look like. And the format that we're copying here is exactly as it's displayed within the NetSuite underlying database. With us having had dedicated groups of engineers working with NetSuite, parsing NetSuite's like 100-something page ODBC driver handbook, and also working with the teams directly to make sure that we're interpreting the data and updating it in the proper format. And I think from everything from why Fivetran has existed, how Fivetran got its start, to kind of what the process looks like and what the end result looks like, covered it all. And I think we can probably open up to questions now.
Thank you, gentlemen. This was awesome. So guys, Q&A time. Who's going to start first? Maybe I can just start quickly. So Joe, you mentioned transformation. Are you using DBT transformers from Fivetran, or these are separate transformations you run?
We really transform everything in views. So I mean, everything lands in BigQuery, and then we just write views, and then and so in most cases that's what. And actually, we have diagrammed a series of views. So you can think of like there's like a data architecture essentially flow that you can envision where we say, okay, well, we've got, we're pulling in all this information from Dynamo. Let's make a view that kind of encapsulates what's in that table in a simpler way to use, and then other tables, and then other tables, and then there are then other views, right, that use those tables that move toward what we would want to show in Looker. And so then we maintain an architecture that is that everyone can look at and see, and we can update. But everything is views, and so there are some things. So Fivetran's ability to execute SQL on an interval or after you've loaded data is useful to us, because we do the one challenge to just copying full tables over is that sometimes the tables have things in them that we do not want to be in BigQuery, and so we will run queries to get rid of that data. And that's important to us. So that's the primary thing we use the Fivetran functionality that can kind of execute SQL, wipe out things we just don't want there. Mainly for size reasons, because BigQuery really just charge you on size, and so there's a lot of extraneous stuff in some of these records that is not necessary for the queries we want.
That's cool. And then you mentioned Immuta company for tokenization, really, to hide personal PII data. Like, why didn't you use DLP from Google, because you're already there? Like, how did it?
It doesn't do what you would want. I mean, it doesn't do what we would want, which is what we're interested in. Is there's data in these tables that some people need and other people don't, and we also want to know who's accessing it.
Okay.
And so the question is, what's the most effective way to do that? And this company, Immuta, is a very good solution that essentially exists as a proxy between BigQuery and Looker. And it's between it's not just those, right? Immuta works between sort of any database and anything that would be visualizing or retrieving data from that database. But, and then what it does is it essentially looks at the SQL that you're running and it rewrites it based upon the user. And it also logs all of the information about what was retrieved. It also has some DLP functionality. So you can ask it to try to find data, like things that sensitive data in your underlying database, and it will go identify them, and then you can create policies around, oh goodness, I didn't realize that in the, I mean, I'm just making this up, but like in the text comments field, regularly for this type of like ticket in Zendesk, people are putting credit card numbers in. I mean, Zendesk has other ways for you to prevent that, but like that sort of thing you can find automatically, and all of it helps from a compliance perspective to ask, like what you don't want is lots of people having access to all of this information and not having a handle on who's accessing it and not having a way to limit some access to it. And so Immuta makes it very easy to do both of those things. And there really isn't, I mean, Looker has some of that functionality, but it's just nowhere near as full featured as what Immuta lets you do.
And anybody else, or I can shoot one more? So, okay, I'll go with you. For everything you provided alternatives. For Looker, you just assumed it's a tool for visualization. Like, why didn't you choose something else? Like, what were the other options you were considering?
There are, so I mean, the two primary ones are Looker and Tableau. Tableau is not nearly as serverless and software as a service based as Looker. I will say that a lot of the people who use Looker, who have used Tableau, have some complaints about, well, this was really easy in Tableau. I've used both. I've spent more time with Looker. I find Looker to be like 1,000,000 times better than Tableau. But I think this is probably also the perspective of like, I'm a former DBA and I'm a developer, and my desire to, and I haven't, and less of, I mean, I did a lot in Excel, but a little bit less of like doing everything in Excel. And I find there's high overlap of like the people who like to live in Excel and their love of Tableau. I mean, we could hook both of them up. We've talked about getting Tableau licenses, but my rule in something like this is that when someone comes to me and says, I can't do it in Looker and I could do it in Tableau, I say, okay, well, Looker's got this great chat support. And so here's what I need. We will buy you Tableau, but you have to, I'm going to make you jump through some hoops. I need you to have a chat session in Looker where you tell them exactly what you could do in Tableau and explain exactly how you do it in Tableau. And then you need to give them a chance to show you how you could do it in Looker. And if they can get you 80% of the way there, then you're going to be okay with that. And we're not going to do anything. But if you get them in that chat to admit they can't do it, Looker can't do that, they can't even get 80% of the way, then we'll buy you Tableau. And you will get a copy of Tableau because we can totally hook it up and it's fine, and we'll set up the server and all of those things. That's my standing rule to you. Just send me that chat transcript. And I've made that offer 20 times and I've never gotten a chat transcript back. So I have to assume it wasn't that pressing.
That's cool. Guys, anybody else?
But I will say, like we have like that, I have that policy, and I could give you lots of times where that policy has led me to changing things. Like we're on our third referral system. We originally started with Ambassador, then went to Referral Rock, and are now in the process of moving to FriendBuy. For that reason, people actually did come with here's what I wanted to do, and I went to the other vendor and they said they couldn't do it. And so so I can point to places where I follow, where we have made changes there. But in this category, I actually think Looker can always get you 80% of the way to where Tableau was. So
cool. Thank you. Anybody else? I enjoy chatting with Joe, but this is a group meetup. Anybody else?
You said some old dogs. What kind of dogs?
So I have a, are you still in here? I still left. So I've got a 15-year-old Beagle Lab mix, a 14-year-old Beagle, and a 2-year-old Bernie Doodle. But the Beagle mix, the Beagle Lab and the Beagle are very cranky and ornery dogs now. They don't. They're glad that they have a home here because no one would want them otherwise, I think.
Hopefully the Bernie Doodles keep them young.
Well, annoying the heck out of them. I also have a cat, and so the Bernie Doodle and the cat play, and they go. The cat likes to swipe the Bernie Doodles. Yeah, I mean, I got 3 kids too, so they're also keeping everybody on their toes.
How old are the kids?
I have 11-year-old, a boy-girl twins, and a 7-year-old daughter.
Nice. Enjoy them.
Yeah, it's good.
So while other guys are getting courage, like as preparing for this meetup, I was checking out your podcast with Jeremy, and you were talking about agility, and we agreed at so many points there. Can you maybe throw some points about this developer guide and like enlighten the audience about your approach to agility?
Well, I think that there is this belief that agile means 2-week sprints, Scrum, but I mean, literally in the Agile Manifesto, the first line is people over processes. And so if everybody defines Agile as the same set of processes, like it's clearly not what was intended by the Agile Manifesto. And so, I like the description that I have for our Agile is that we come in peace every day to write and ship software, and every 2 weeks we do a retro to figure out how to do it better. And so there isn't a lot of, so we can describe processes, but, and if you saw what if you were with us, you'd see something that sort of looks like Kanban but with like weekly planning meetings. I think the most important things from my perspective are what are in the book Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, etc., which talk about, you should be releasing multiple times a week. You should have a relatively short amount of time from dev complete to being live in production. You should not have to roll back very frequently, or ideally never roll back, but like you patch forward. And then it doesn't take you that long to resolve issues in production when you have them. Those are the 4 metrics that they talk about. And I think that if you can, and there are services, there's a company called Haystack, which is a little pricey. Although I will tell you, you can negotiate with them on price, like to sort of whatever you're willing to pay, in my experience. But they will give you those metrics in your organization. We just use GitHub and GitHub projects. We don't even use Jira, but they can run those metrics out of GitHub. And it's really nice to be able to see them and see, how many releases a week you've had over time, and sort of what, and if you mark things the right way, it'll tell you, how many hot fixes you had. I think if you just have hot fix in the description, it'll catch those. And it does a really good job of letting you think through how you're doing with respect to those metrics, and not other, I think, less useful metrics about like burn up downs or burn down charts or things like that. We do try to do some things to measure velocity, but I think that those metrics that they have are much more useful. And so, I think one other comment I'll make is that I work with a lot of people who have a lot of insurance expertise. So they've worked for large insurance companies, and they're used to enterprise development timelines. And they're used to a lot of the process that exists in enterprise software development. And so, I would be in these meetings with them when they would join, and they would say, well, what's our 18-month roadmap? And I would say, well, as soon as I give you an 18-month roadmap, there are 2 things that are going to happen. One, I can't react to anything, and we're young. And so I think we need to react to things. Like if something's going to kill us, we need to react to that. If we think something's a great opportunity, we should react to it. And we just don't have visibility in any of those things right now. And so either I either I make a roadmap that's useless, or we die because I'm slavishly following the roadmap. So I don't want to create something that's useless, and I don't want to die. So I don't see any point in making a roadmap. And then then there was a sort of like, well, how can I get accountability? I mean, if this is just you just sort of, like give me deadlines on everything. Tell me when you're gonna get stuff done. Well, but that takes away our agility. And so you get this back and forth. And so, so eventually, I would have these somewhat insane conversations where I would say, well, can you tell me about a time when something's been really important for you to get done and developed that it didn't? And can you tell me the thing that got done like in front of that just seemed like you didn't understand why that got done before the thing that was more important? Or like something that you just felt like took too long. They would say, well, I don't have anything. I was like, well, then it's working great. Like the outcomes are fantastic. Like, why do you care if we have a roadmap? Why do you care? I mean, how often are we down? How often are you like screaming because it's not working, right? Like these things that should matter to you, how many accounts have we lost due to like IT failures or dev failures or deploy failures? The answer that we have good answers here, but people are used to distrusting development, and they're used to wanting to like have some whip to crack on development, and they're not used to this notion of like, tell me when you've been unhappy about what we've been doing. And so it's sort of nuts when I think about like, but I still have these conversations. There's still a sense of like, but I always want to go back to that. Like, can we talk about the outcomes? Like, are you generally happy with what happens in software development? And if not, like, tell me what that is. Let's have that conversation, not have like a more granular conversation about like, what are the things that, by the way, we tell people we're going to do this week. Like, this is our plan this week. And then at the end of the week, we're like, this is what we did. Like, it's very transparent. We give everyone in the company as a GitHub account. They can all make tickets. I mean, like, we're not hiding anything. You can see everything. Everyone's got access to all the source code. Every time we do a release, again, multiple times a day often, like it goes into a Slack channel. It's got all the links to all the PRs. You can go look at them. Like they're tied back to the, issues. Like they're full designs. Everyone's got access to all of InVision and Zeppelin. And like, everything's done in the open here. I just think, so there aren't dissatisfied people, but there are like sort of people who have a latent distrust about software development who I don't know if they'll ever actually get over that.
That's amazing.
I've got one for you. I've been talking with Daniel about this before the call, and something that sort of our organization is dealing with. And you mentioned your discussion to potential shareholders early on, and do they, is there actually any code there? How in those environments, how do you deal with the lock-in discussion?
With the what discussion? The walking? The
lock-in discussion.
It's funny. We don't get. It's been a very long time since I've had an investor here. She really doesn't like being picked up, but I will pick up this. Here's the beagle, the 14-year-old beagle.
Thanks,
right,
Joe.
Right. No, you want to get that. All right. She's like, I deserve a treat for that. All right. It's been a long time since I've had a lock-in discussion with an investor. I think the way we position things with investors is, we are cheaper, faster, better than anybody else. And we deliver a unique experience, right? So, I mean, like a lot of if you looked at our pitches to investors, there's no pitch that's like, we're technology geniuses, invest in our tech. But every pitch we have is like, here's a problem, and here's the unique way that we solve this problem. And then, the biggest challenge we have is actually the moat question, which is like, why couldn't someone just copy what you've done? And so one of the ways we answer that is we talk about how much time and effort we've put into interfaces. And so, I mean, if you think about our code base, so at this point is probably 350,000 lines of front-end code in various ways that has been under continuous development for 3 years. And we can show you like all of the tests we've done, all of the interfaces we've gone through, and all of the so like, you know, and I mean, it's hard to get volume on a lot of this, but we've probably done like 20 really good A/B tests. And so we could take you on an evolution of interaction, right? Like this is what it was like to buy insurance when we went live. And like, here's the next version, here's the next version, here's the next version, here's the next version. And like, this is how we broke it into pieces, and this is how we recombined it, and this is how we changed this part of it. And then we made this change and it had this impact, and we've got all the data on it. We also use amplitude as part of this for funnel design. And so when you have these conversations, I mean, a lot of what you're able to what we're able to show with the investors is just a real mastery of the subject matter that they're not expecting. And so instead of just saying like, wow, we've got gee whiz tech, we've got all this data nobody has and we're winning, we layer it more into like, we've really gone in and we do a lot of embedding. So like partners like within like Quicken Loans is the largest mortgage originator in the US, and we're embedded into their mortgage origination flow such that when it asks you, hey, do you need insurance? Can you upload proof of insurance? It says, do you not have insurance? You can go here, and we're a partner of theirs, and you literally click on us and it lands you on a review page. And then you can go like to the next page and you can put in, I think you just have to put in your phone number because we've got all the other information and we bill Quicken Loans for it. And you just click done. And then we send all the information to Quicken Loans and to you. I mean, it's like click, click. Now you're insured, and it's like a bindable price. It's like that price won't change, and it will go into effect like on the day you're going to own your house. So you're just done with that, and it's a delightful flow. But that didn't happen overnight, right? There was an evolution of what that looked like, and there was an evolution of like the discussions with Quicken Loans. There was an evolution of user testing and customer development, and there were iterations on like data we had to get and like how our interface worked, and like understanding how many people are going to be on phones versus desktop, et cetera, et cetera. And so we tend to turn the conversations into that in turn, like, let us tell you all of the head start we've got and all of those things. And then we can, at the end of that presentation, we can go back and we say, now let's like pick a competitor and let us tell you all of the things that competitor would have to do to get to where we are. And usually it's like at least 10 really big meaty things.
Okay.
That is awesome.
Can I ask a question there, Daniel?
Ask Joe.
All right. I just didn't know if there was other people in line. No, I was just going to say, I think it's great how simple the back-end architecture is from what you've described. And you're saying you only hire front-end developers, and you're heavily relying on the APIs and software as a service partners, and all that's excellent philosophy. A lot of us here are sort of serverless architects, and I'm just kind of thinking, well, how do you manage that? Because when I'm thinking about what your product does, the first thing I think of is, well, you know, you're going to have to like communicate with the underwriter and send a request and get the response and do this. Now I've got a queue of information, and oh, I better add a circuit breaker or else we can't have this flow working. And I'm thinking that there's a lot of back-end infrastructure there, and yet you're saying there's none. So I'm just curious, how do you get away with that?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we largely, for high volume things like that, we're using other services. So our underwriting ticket system is Zendesk. And so you're right, we're generating thousands of tickets, and sometimes thousands of tickets every like 30 minutes. But this is what's great about Zendesk API is you can just hammer it. And they don't care. I mean, that's what it's built to do. Sort of the same thing with Five9. They're just these like, and another thing, like it's very useful to understand, Segment is taking a lot of work, right? So we send on every front end interaction. We also use LogRocket really heavily for session capture and replay, which is much better than Full Story. That was a switch we made because someone came to us and was like, we could do this with LogRocket and we can't do a Full Story. You know, Segment is where we throw all of the events. So if we had to maintain our own event bus, like, yes, there would be some sort of kinesis thing, and there would be circuit breakers and things like that. But we really do, at present, everything is essentially sort of stateless and idempotent in terms of the functions and essentially all of the functions sit behind AppSync. And so the way you can think about this is that, So we have these AppSync APIs. You can access them from a mobile app or many React apps, or we also we use this tyk.io. Tyk.io is a API gateway as a service, sort of like Apigee, which is Google's one, but Tyk is way cheaper. And Tyk is our API that we give to third-party agents, so they can like quote and bind with us without having to send people to our site. So they can like brand their own experience and embed in their apps. So we have several like tech-enabled insurance agents and brokers who integrate us into their flows. But all of those hit AppSync. So everything is like a call comes to AppSync. AppSync is then either pulling stuff directly from Dynamo or invoking a Lambda function, right? All that scales sort of infinitely. And the only writes that we do, so what are the writes that we're doing? We write to Dynamo. So again, infinitely scalable, essentially. We write to Segment. That's the event bus. That's going to customer IO. It's going to other things. All that's fine. We do write tickets to Zendesk. And we use Redis pretty heavily. And so we do use Redis clouds, although there are a couple of really interesting serverless Redis options that I would probably investigate first. But I'm quite happy with Redis cloud. It's not super cheap, but it is. And I mean, I think it's probably not definitionally serverless, but from my perspective, I have to do no work. I can log into the console. I say, it needs to be this big, and it just is, and it has been flawless in terms of how it's actually operated. So it has felt like it's sort of serverless out there, although I think they're actually managing multiple VMs in Amazon for it. But yeah, so we're writing to if you can live in that world of sort of, you're not actually doing anything. No, we do use queues. We do use DynamoDB streams too, but again, they're just invoking more Lambda functions. So everything is set up. The queues exist in order to be able to return faster because AppSync has this 30-second timeout. And Dynamo Streams is a very useful way to deal with error control. So when you buy a policy from us, you insert a record called a bind into a table called bind request. So it's just like, I want to buy it. And then that invokes this process. And what's great about DynamoDB Streams is if it fails, it'll just rerun it. So that code is written so that if it fails, it's just waiting to run again. And it's very good at caching, using Redis to cache all of the writes it has done along the way. Sometimes there are errors with that. It doesn't, but it generally is very good. And so we have these situations where sometimes one of the services is down. We don't want to lose a sale. It's totally fine because it's down and it just keeps retrying until it comes back up, and then it goes all the way through. Most of our customers get all their documentation in like 10 seconds after they buy. But honestly, if it took a day, it's really not that big of a deal. People are usually fine with that.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's a poster story for. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, what is Segment? I only heard really about Segment. I don't know. An enterprise bus is a broad term.
Yeah, and they don't call it that. It's Segment.com. It's been bought by Twilio. And it is, I think of it as like an event bus, sort of like a pinpoint or something. But, effectively, you basically have two different calls you can make to it. You can make an identify call that says, hey, I've got an event from this person, and you can send whatever attributes you want. And then you can send an event call. Hey, this person that I identified did this event. And if you don't identify the person, they'll just associate it with an anonymous user. And as you keep making events, it'll keep associating with that anonymous user. And if at a later point you decide to identify them, it'll connect all those events. So all of them will be associated with the person. But what it lets you do is it lets you do things like, if you come to our site and you put in your name and your address, and you get a price, and you say you get a price, and then you put in an email address. We're like, hey, do you want to copy this in email? You put in an email address. We will send an event called successful quote entered email through Segment. That gets passed to lots of different systems. So it'll get passed to Google Analytics, and our marketing team can look at it there. It goes to Amplitude, and where we can build the funnels within Amplitude. It goes into BigQuery, where we can run reports on it. goes to and it goes all of these places at once, but it goes to customer IO, where we can set up a campaign that says, okay, now start emailing this person. And we have like a 28 email campaign, but the goal is to get you to buy. Okay, so we send you these emails like, hey, you should buy Branch for this reason. Hey, here's your price, we've saved it. Hey, we think we know why you haven't bought yet, and here's why, Branch is a great cut, etc. But if you at any point click on one of those and you buy it, the email campaign stops, because we'll get the event and we'll stop sending the emails. And these campaigns will run independently, and you can go into Customer IO and you can look at the reporting on them, and you can pull all that information back into our system, so that when we can pull it into Zendesk, we can pull it into Fivetran. So whenever we're looking at someone's information, we can know where they are in all of these journeys of these campaigns. This is also how we send your billing receipts, your billing notifications. If you put in your cell phone number, we text you and we say, hey, we've got your price here. And by the way, if you'd like to set up an appointment to talk with a licensed agent about your insurance, click here, and it's sort of like a Calendly type thing called a Appointlet, where they can sign up for it. They just click the link on their phone and go sign up. All of that happens. Again, no code. There's no code in any of this. It is this thing you just send events and identifications on, and it lets you do things in response to them. That's a huge part of, people will build that infrastructure a lot. Now, I think one of the challenges is when you look at the cost of it, it's like Algolia. You look at the cost of Algolia and it's like, gosh, this is expensive. And Elasticsearch seems cheaper, but it's not. In any sort of total cost of ownership, Algolia is much cheaper than Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is terrible. It's bad at indexing, it's bad at searching, it's bad at security. Algolia is great at all three of those things. But you can get sticker shock with all of these things. So Segment, they have good ways to ramp you on as a startup, but you're going to be paying at least $1,000 a month for Segment. Customer IO, you're going to be paying at least $200 to $300 a month for Customer IO, even at very low volumes. Today, we probably pay $30,000 a year for Segment, and we probably pay $18,000 a year for Customer IO. And those are no-brainer costs for us. They are both. And again, to go back to blocking, our marketing team goes into Customer IO and makes campaigns, right? They can go into Amplitude and make those funnels. They know our event stack. They will ask the developers to add events, right? They'll say, hey, can we get an event here when this thing happens like this? But other than that, all of the analysis can happen outside of it. And what's great is the way Facebook ads or Google ads or a lot of these ads work, you set all this up, you set up the funnel, and then you can just start auto-tuning the ad, right? Once you got the funnel in place. And Segment makes all this possible without having to do any other work. And so when one of our marketing people comes to us and says, hey, can we use this other service? Almost certainly it's a relatively easy thing to plug into Segment to get that event stream. And what's also great is that every one of these services has the same set of events on the same set of people. And so you tend not to have that problem of well, over here it says this and over here it says this other thing. In general, they're fully in sync.
Does that bring a bit of risk that your system's performance is dependent upon the config you have in Segment? What happened if your config went poof in Segment? Have you got all of that in your source control and you can just call the APIs and have it reconfigured?
Yeah, you could. Segment is really just a proxy, and they're dumping, they dump data every hour into BigQuery. So we've got a full log of it. So yeah, I think with all of these services, there's a pretty easy, I guess I didn't really answer the locking question. My view on the locking question is if I can describe to you how I would build the replacement product, or I can tell you I would just move to this other product, and I could tell you how long it would take, I'm not locked in. I'm actually a lot less locked in than somebody running EKS. I don't know if you've used EKS, the Amazon Kubernetes service, and looked at GKE, but migrating a large deployment from one to the other would be a lot of, that's a significant amount of work. I think a lot of the migrations we would do would be less. The biggest lock-in we have is AppSync, and it's just because nothing really exists like AppSync, although, we're starting to see like Prisma and Hasura are getting closer to AppSync, and so I think we're going to have like a viable thing to move. Although, you know, AppSync never goes down and costs us like $10 a month, so I don't think we're ever going to leave it. But yeah, I don't worry. I mean, you know, I would be shocked, especially now it's owned by Twilio, that Segment. I don't feel much exposure on the Segment front. But it definitely, if it went down or went poof, like it would be painful while we like moved it to something else.
Yeah, sir. I didn't mean Segment itself went poof. I meant your config. Like, are you reliant that someone has to log in and set up a new connector and a new definition, or if you got that in source control and you can push your config through their APIs?
The definition is so trivial that it's sort of like you basically like go in and put your Google Analytics API key in Segment. That's it.
Okay.
It's not. There is not. It's like Fivetran. Like there's just not a lot to be configured. Customer IO though, like you configure all your email templates and stuff, and you stick them in there, and so that's something that actually would be great. I mean, I think it's what you're describing is a bigger risk with Customer IO. SendGrid has some of this templating. Mailgun has some of this templating, and so you know, Customer IO is adding some of those more API centric pieces. They will export them for you though, so you can at least do that. You could ask them, but you can't actually like source control that right now with Customer IO. And that actually is, I think that's a case where, you know, this concern you're voicing is definitely legitimate there. But in Segment, the configuration is so trivial, I just wouldn't take you that long to set it up again.
Your mass mail is SendGrid. You're mentioning that.
We use SendGrid for deliverability. Customer IO uses SendGrid to send the emails. Just because like this mail deliverability with like clean IP addresses and like proper DKIM SPF setup is like so specialized that I think if you care about delivering emails into mailboxes, like you need a service like SendGrid. And of course, SendGrid keeps adding features. So SendGrid does have some great email templating now. The challenge is that I like these omni-channel communication platforms. So I like being able to like have an event come from Segment and then use that to trigger a webhook or an SMS message or a phone call out or an in-app notification or an email or whatever, and actually do it on a per person basis, right? Like I can have my billing notification event say, depending upon whether the customer has opted into these things in this one event, go do all of these notifications, but only if they've opted in on a per customer basis. Again, basically no software development to do that, and it's built in. And the problem with using something like SendGrid is like just email, right? So like Customer IO is using SendGrid to do email, Twilio to send SMS messages, is using Firebase for Android notifications, different like something else for iOS notifications. And so for the actual like endpoint happening, they're using these specialized services. And at least as we sit today, that seems to work a lot better. It is really the Unix way though, right? It's like everything has its own, like you're just relying on each service for kind of one thing, and it's got to be good at that one thing. But if that's what you're doing, like you can get that. That's not too much to ask for a service.
Love the metaphor. This is awesome. Guys, it's almost 8. I have no hard stop. My wife is at her mom's. But I should. We can do the survey or fire some more questions. I'm having fun. Thank you so much for choosing to be with us. And I hope the world listen to this. This is so much ideas here. I know we're going to call Segment to the meetup. and that headless CMS, that was cool. How did you choose it compared to Contently?
We just do spikes. I mean, I think not in any sort of like unique way, but when we're deciding to do something, some developer gets assigned it, and we ask them to do proof of concepts with every single service. I mean, I have this. I mean, this quote, which I try to impress on everyone who joins me in developing software, is I would prefer you spend 2 weeks doing research and 2 days doing development than 2 days doing research and 2 weeks doing development. And so like, I just don't want the code, and I'm happy for you to spend a lot of time in research. And I'm not, we don't measure people by the number of lines of code that they output. Like our measurement is team-based. As a team, are we delivering to, are we delivering enough outcomes so that everyone's happy with what we're doing and everyone feels like what needs to be done is getting done, right, in the right order. And then if we need to do more, we bring on more people, right? And there's this constant game of like, do we have enough designers, do we have enough PMs, do we have enough developers? Thankfully, we don't have to worry about DBAs, network engineers, DevOps people, backend developers. At least we just have those three set, the three types of people we have. But I think that. Well, anyway, sorry. I think I've answered the question. Don't need to break.
You did. Any other questions while I get the survey ready? Anything else we forgot to ask you? Like, I was joking at the beginning, like Onion, every time I look at something, I discover there is more to it. So many ideas.
Nobody asked about the automated testing. I mean, I really do think that if you want to have junior developers and you want to have calm releases, you need to have good automated, like, feature and end-to-end testing. We use 2 different services for this. I actually use 3. We use Applitools as a visual testing framework. I was more gung-ho on visual testing before, we really got it up and running and working well, and it hasn't been as useful as the functional testing frameworks. We use a service called testim.io that is really great. Highly, highly recommend it. And it is really what protects us from putting things live that break. We also use a competing service called Prod Perfect, which is a bit different. And we use that to help us understand what to merge or not. We run that on every PR, every update to every PR. And it gets updated and maintained by the company. So it's great. It's actually a bit more expensive for us than Testim. We maintain our own tests with Testim, but having both of them cover has been really great, and we'll continue to pay for both of them. And in our React Native app, we use a service called waldo.io, which is just a really great, I don't know of a better React Native testing framework. I think it's kind of the only game in town, but it's very good. And all of these really make it possible to go fast, to bring juniors on board, and to release constantly. And I just don't know how you do it without this sort of protection, because, at least once a week we stop a deploy because of a failure, and it's a legit failure. We've tuned it well. There aren't really false positives as frequently as there are when you start.
That's awesome. We are after 8. Any other questions before I do the survey? So maybe like any pitch, are you hiring developers? Who knows who's going to watch this when we put this on YouTube? How would they experience working with a company like yours?
How would someone?
Yeah, how would somebody, like, are you hiring the company? Like, if somebody listens to this video later on and wants to apply?
Great question. We do have a careers page. We, on the dev side, we hire most of our developers through an internship program out of boot camps. So we really do hire juniors. But you're welcome to contact us if you're like, I would love to work there. Like, we're a startup. We do have a careers page that's a link at the bottom of ourbranch.com. So that's what I would do. I would look there, look at the available jobs, and feel free to reach out. Like, we're a startup. We like people who like us.
I will share the link with the video after. So only 7 of you did the survey. Like, anybody else wants the book, you can do only the first part with the name. You don't need to do much. I posted in the chat link to the survey. Can you see it? So let's do Wheel of Names. So anybody else, or should I do? Do you need more time to do the form? No? Any questions for Joe while I do this? Okay, let's do this, people. So that's all from me now. Like, is there anybody else, any other questions for Joe?
Well, thanks for that. That was great.
This is awesome. Like it's. I will share this probably next weekend, and thank you, Joe, so much. And so if COVID was good for one thing, that's bringing you to us, because there was no way to get you over from Columbus.
Yes, there's a direct flight. I have one of my developers is probably going to move to Canada, so hopefully I'll get to Hamburg. I think he's going to end up in Halifax. But yes, at least for a little while. But yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, feel free you can always write me on Twitter at Joe Emison. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, but Twitter is better.
Thank you. And Brandon as well, like with Fivetran, like you impressed me so much. I'm certifying for Fivetran next week. Like it's just a cool tool. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
I'll keep following you.
And thanks for the talk, Joe.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Stay safe.